Okay, this question says what causes cyclic photophosphorylation, what a mouthful, to occur in photosynthesis? You really need to know your basics of advanced photosynthesis in order to be able to understand this question. So if you've heard of cyclic photophosphorylation, then you probably heard of the opposite, which is non-cyclic. So you need to understand the reasons why both of these types of photophosphorylation exist. So photophosphorylation, if you break that word down, just means photo, in the presence of light, something gets phosphorylated. So I'm adding a phosphate group to something. And the most important thing that's happening with phosphorylation is the production of ATP. So we're basically taking ADP and you're adding a phosphate group to make it ATP, or therefore the production of energy. Normally, and I have a diagram down here to help you be able to see this. This is from what we've studied in class as well, and there's another video that explains these diagrams here. But normally you have something called non-cyclic photophosphorylation, which is where electrons get excited and they get transported in a linear fashion and end up being accepted by NADP, and that NADP combines with electrons and hydrogen to make NADPH, which is one of the things that is needed for the Calvin cycle to actually run. So one problem that can happen is, well, we need something at the end here in order for these electrons to actually reach. And so the electron acceptor in this case has to be NADP+. And so if the electrons go here and then they turn into NADPH and they move off, and this continues to happen, then these electrons can continue to move and be very, very happy. Now, what happens though when we run out of this NADP+? We run out of this NADP+ when the NADPH over here, which is supposed to be used in the Calvin cycle, doesn't get used up. And it doesn't get used up if there's something that's blocking the Calvin cycle. So if there's not enough carbon dioxide and you can't actually do the Calvin cycle, you don't actually create glucose, then you end up with this situation where NADPH will start to accumulate. If this accumulates, well, none of this stuff gets converted back into NADP. And if it doesn't get converted back into NADP, then there's nothing to accept the electrons. The electrons stop moving, and then you basically lose this this current that's moving around in order to fill this space with hydrogen ions. And you need hydrogen ions in here to actually cause a concentration gradient to form so that ATP can actually be made. So it's quite complicated, and all these things are interrelated, which is why I've broken this up into 3 different parts when explaining it. So this question is really requiring you to understand a synthesis of all of those things. So if any of what I said just made sense to you, or you've reviewed this recently, so why do we need cyclic photophosphorylation to occur? It's basically because if there's no electron acceptor, we still need electrons to move, because if the electrons stop moving, we don't make any ATP. That's the main problem. So cyclic photophosphorylation exists so that when light hits photosystem 1, electrons can still get excited and they can still keep moving in a circle here, as opposed to requiring something to accept them. As long as they move, you create a concentration gradient of protons. As long as you create a concentration gradient of protons, they can still diffuse out and you can still make ATP. So we want there to be ATP. So if you look at these answers, ATP is not required for Calvin cycle. We just told you that ATP and NADPH are required, so that's not going to be the reason. Light-dependent reactions are slower than light-independent reactions. There's no real basis for that, so if you're not sure, put a question mark next to it. Photoactivation of photosystem 2 is inhibited. It's not that it gets inhibited, this still gets really excited, there's just no place for electrons to go, so electrons have to start going in a circle around here. So B is not going to look good. And so if you end up with looking at all these answers here, the best answer you're going to end up with still is reduced NADPH, which becomes NADPH. That's the reduced form that they're talking about here, is accumulating in the stroma. It's not being converted back into this NADP+, which we need to actually accept our electrons. So that's why A is going to be the best answer. If this is still really confusing for you, you got to go back and Do some reading online with BioNinja, or use the videos that I posted before on the different steps of photosynthesis for higher level students. Non-cyclic photophosphorylation versus cyclic photophosphorylation. If you go through those videos and steps, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to understand all of this and the background, what's going on. Okay.